Great. So I'll sort of start again what I was just saying. So yes, so we're perfectly formed, small but perfectly formed this morning, just the three of us. And what I was saying, Colin reminded me to press record, was that I just thought we'd sort of take a look forward this year. January is always a time when people talk about New Year's resolutions and goals and things like that. And whilst, there are other formats to do that, I thought for us in this little group, it's about where does our faith sit? How are we going to lean on our faith to a certain degree in 2023? Because there'll be ups and downs, won't there? There'll be difficult periods as well as maybe periods where we're bouncing along thinking things are going well. And what I was saying was that my New Year's Day passage in my Bible app was the one that I circulated, which was the John 15 chapter verse 1, I think it was. And this concept of recognizing that we are connected to Jesus in particular, and how that fits. So what I thought we'd do is I'll just open you in a very brief prayer, and then we'll get you to sort of give your thoughts ahead for 2023 and where you see your faith, if at all, sitting in, how you're going to tackle this year. And I'll explain my feelings on that as well. So I'll just open in a short prayer first of all, though. So Father God, thank you for being here this morning with Tim and Colin and I ask that you bless both Tim, Colin and myself as we look forward to 2023, knowing that at all times you are part of our lives, part of our businesses, and an ever-present support for all that we intend to do. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the vine and being connected to the vine? Particularly, Tim, I'm interested in your perspective as somebody that I think hasn't sort of, maybe, I don't know whether you've gone to another church or you've drifted away from certainly renewal. So I'm just wondering where your faith sits this year.
Well, I haven't drifted away from church. I just, not been able to get to renewal. Where the faith will be, absolute faith. I mean, I don't know whether you're aware that I had both my knees changed.
Yeah, you told me. Yeah, was that in the autumn, late autumn? You had that?
No, that was in July, and I distinctly remember actually somebody saying, "But having both done at the same time is a real big ask," and I was getting paranoid about it, and so I got to a point where in my prayers I was just saying, I'm going to have faith as to how it's going to happen. It's no longer in my control. If it's going to happen, it will happen, and what comes out the other end, it'll be. And I distinctly remember that. And so on the Friday of the operation, I went in, and it was like I was being greeted as some megastar. There was every door opened, the whole operation happened, and even the medical profession was saying, well, no, you can't be doing two at the same time. You can't. And the surgeon has said, yes, you can have your both done at the same time, and they're saying you won't be able to walk, you won't be able to do this, you won't be able to do that. And I distinctly remember on the Saturday morning after the operation, they were saying, oh, it's really difficult. It took 4 nurses to get me out of the bed. The wound was bleeding, and I thought, what have I done to myself? And I remained in faith. And by Tuesday of that week, so 4 days later, I was walking unaided.
It's just amazing.
And I can't believe it. And I just give that as testimony. All I distinctly remember just saying, I'm just giving absolute faith. There's nothing I can do about it anymore. Nothing I can do about the operation. About going into the operation. I've just got to remain in faith. And as I say, within 4 days, I was walking.
And how are you now? How are the knees now?
The knees are fine. It's the rest of the body that's jiggered.
So you need to go and do the same thing again, do you? And everything else replaced.
Well, I think, Paul, the truth of the answer is that because the knees were so out of line, it pushed the rest of the body out of line.
Except my wife's got the same problem. Sam's got the same challenge.
Yeah. So it's a bit like if your car wheels are out of alignment, it's just realigning the whole species.
Yeah, and it's the whole skeletal and muscular elements, isn't it?
But as far as my religious, Christian belief, I do have a devotional, and there was a really pertinent, I get a daily devotional, a really pertinent passage, and it's Philippians 4:12-13.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll read it to you. I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstances, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of them having abundance and suffering need. I can do all of these things through him who strengthens me.
So what was that again? Philippians
4:12-13.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I was in the shower this morning when I do my Bible passage and I had my conversation with God, and I was saying something very similar, just giving this year up really, and just saying, look, whether it's good, bad, there will be, again, I imagine there'll be waves, periods when, I've got to pay tax bills and things like that, which is always a bit unnerving. But it's just keeping that, or remembering, isn't it, that we're connected to something?
Yes.
There's something else there.
So relying on the faith for when it's tough, but also remembering that the tops, appreciate the tops and realize the heights as well, accept the good times, and just don't take those for granted. And I think that's the biggest problem with society. We're always expecting to be doing more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got a 3-bedroom house now. I've got to have a 5-bedroom house. I've got to have 2 cars. I've got to. It's never enough, and it's that conspicuous consumption. I know retailing is part of it, but even the hospitality trade. We spoke earlier about it was quiet. Well, the hospitality trade are suffering, but actually they were living on, it was like something out of Hiroshima's Boss and Sodom and Gomorrah, some of the activity in the hospitality trade. You see it every, Friday and Saturday nights, the debauched behavior. Well, actually that comes with money, doesn't it?
I've often thought, because my office is on a high street, and 3 doors up there's a wine bar.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's a wine bar where Sam and I spent our first month or two of being married, because it was my brother and Sam's sister that ran that wine bar, and we lived with them for the first few weeks of our marriage. But I'm always amazed as I go past this place called Strawberry Fields. No matter what time of day it is, once it opens, there's always half dozen, 10 people sitting drinking beer or whatever, or drinking. And I often do think, how do people afford it? Go back to what you were saying, Tim, about the cost of living crisis. It's about choices. The choice to go and get absolutely wazzed down the pub, it's going to cost you 30, 40 quid easy, if not more.
And some.
To get absolutely hammered. And it's a bit like smoking and things like that, which is slightly different because it's an addiction. But, you do think, it is choices. And I think, there is the gluttony. I was talking to somebody the other day who went out on New Year's Eve and got absolutely bladdered. And I just think, how can you afford to do that? It's just so expensive. So what's your perspective, Colin, on
the one simple answer that is drinking Wetherspoons, because they do have cheap beer.
Yes, I know you like a beer, Colin. You're a beer drinker, aren't you?
Well, I'm just going to move my camera slightly. So what Tim was saying about sort of gluttony, I bought myself a new guitar.
Good for you.
I've now got 4 guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine would say, well, I can only play one at any one time, and I don't play that very well. But it was, I've wanted one of these for quite a while, but I quite like the others as well, so different styles than that. I took a lot of thinking about before buying it, because we've now got the money, because we've had a very good year. Mm-hmm. And it was that, well, I'd like one of them, but I really want it for the sound. So I could go for one of those, which is it's a copy, so it doesn't look quite the same, and all these sort of things. And then, I could maybe, and Elaine said, hang on, the reason you're thinking about this is because you've had a very good year. This isn't yes, it's a luxury, but it's also a reward for the year that you've had. And I think, and bizarrely, she ended up saying, listen, you've got the money, so why don't you buy exactly the one that you want and be done with it? And I went on to this one website to order it, or I was going to go down to the local shop to buy one. And they got one that someone had traded in for £150 less. So I actually got exactly what, because I've made that, and I'm sure it's that sort of, yeah, you're still trying to be careful with the money, even though you've got the money, then that landed in my lap 150 quid cheaper than it should have been.
I think it's what Tim just said there about, isn't it? There's a difference between gluttony and reward, really.
Yes, yes. But it took me, even though I wanted one, it took me several months because historically I've had, and that passage that that Tim referred to, I've had those tough times where we're not going to be able to buy orange juice this month, or if we're going to get some orange juice, it's going to have to be the ultra basic. And I think we were talking at our house group last night about that sort of being careful with money, and it cropped up in conversation. And I think that there's still that. Yes, I've had a very good year, and hopefully that's going to continue this year. But it's about being grateful for those good times, because there's hard times maybe just around the corner. And I think it's having that, remembering where those good times are. I think you probably both know that, historically when times have been tough for me, I've done a quick, boss, can you just, another client would be really useful, and lo and behold, money comes in because I get a new client and that. And it's that then remembering to say thank you for that. And I think for me, and again, going back to what we were discussing, we're working through the second half of Joshua at the moment. And the passages we were looking at last night were all about faith and works, and how do you show your faith with your works. And sort of what we ended up sort of saying was, the works that you do are evidence of your faith, because it's the way that you are showing that you have faith in what you're doing. So I think, summing all of that up, looking at 2023, it's having that faith that man upstairs knows where I need to be this time next year, and by putting my faith in the man upstairs to guide me through that, and to listen to what he says, and to be grateful for every positive during the year, and recognizing that any negatives are just part of that balance, and the negatives will never be more than I can take. I think it's keeping all that together within that that, I suppose, capsule of the fact that the man upstairs is sat there looking after me.
I think exactly, Colin. I think the passage from John about the vine and him being the gardener and as well is also quite interesting, because it talks about pruning a lot, doesn't it? Excuse me. So there are times sometimes that we have to let things go. We have to things will be taken away from us that we often can perceive as, well, that's not helpful. But often we know paradoxically that some of the toughest times in business in particular are the times where we reshape things. We restart stuff, or we stop something, or as Tim has done lots of times since I've known him, change direction slightly, look for something different. If something's not working, sometimes it's better to cut it off than just to flog a dead horse almost, And I think it's that recognition as well, isn't it, that things will need to be chopped off, need to lose things. And certainly from my perspective of 2023, and this is the other bit I was going to ask you both about, really, what's your word or your phrase for 2023 for you? And to illustrate that, mine for me, which came to me in prayer, was, it doesn't have to be me. That's my phrase for this year. It doesn't have to be me. So if I'm going to grow my business, I'm having to literally change my whole clothing. It's from doing everything myself to now having other people that can do things for me and are probably better at it than I am. for me to focus on just the bits that I've got to do. I've got to let go of a lot of stuff, and I've got to, for myself, prune myself rather than prune the business. So recognizing that it doesn't have to be me is very important. And then, and then the other bit I would say in terms of John's passage is just remembering to stay connected. That's the hardest thing, I think, when things are difficult or you're stressed or you're anxious. We become so obsessed with our minds that we forget that there is something we can tap into, whether it's God, Jesus, the universe, however you want to describe it. There's just this force that Tim referred to in terms of his prayer when he said, look, I'm giving it up to you, help me walk again almost. And 4 days later he's on his feet. That is, I'm sure, is miraculous for what the surgeons were saying, Tim, and yes, but everything else in your body had a kilter, but
yes, but all I can say is that's what I did, because there was nothing more I could do. I just, I just had absolute faith, and it will be what it will be.
And we've talked about this before, haven't we, as well? I think this is another word for me for 2023, but has also been a word for quite a long time, which is surrender. And it's not surrender, as I was saying, in terms of putting my hands up and saying, shoot me or whatever, don't shoot me, that type of surrender. Powerful surrender is when we recognize, like you did, Tim, you're just handing it over to a higher power. That's not a passive thing. That's a very active thing. When I'm saying, as I did this morning, to Jesus, right, okay, as long as you're with me, I accept whatever's coming, good and bad, great and difficult. I just surrender that, because I know that in that, as long as I'm connected to you, we'll come through together. And I think it's interesting, something Sam said when we went to the Christmas, was it Christmas Eve? No, the carol service before Christmas Eve, and Sam came to that as well. And she said, I didn't like what Pastor Johnny said about, he basically was trying to explain that if you're not connected in some way to Jesus, to God, to some sort of higher power, that's quite a lonely existence. It's quite tough, because you're saying basically, I'll do it all myself. And Sam interpreted that as, well, if you're not a Christian, then you're out there, you're by yourself. That's not what Johnny meant. I don't think he meant, it's tough. Life is difficult. And if you don't have Jesus in your life, or at least a connection to God in some way, that's quite tricky, isn't it? And I can't imagine going through this year now just under my own power. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, but Kipling said something, didn't he? But the strength of the pack is in the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is in the pack. Yeah, if you're not part of the pack, you're a lone wolf, or you're a lone animal. It's exceptionally lonely. Yeah, that's, I think,
what Johnny was trying to say.
Well, that's that was my interpretation of what he was trying to. Yeah.
But I think as well, it wasn't an exclusion type idea that if you're not in the gang, you don't get the benefits. It was actually, if you're not in the gang, that's tough. That is hard. Yes. And I think that's again the story of being connected to the vine. Is for all of us, those maybe listening on recording as well, is to remember that we are connected to something incredibly powerful, should we want to tap into that. And often I think, as we talk about this, taking Sunday into Monday, preachers will often talk a lot about life, but don't talk directly about your career or your work or your business in the same context. And I think what the Divine Business Network is very much about is connecting our faith to our work. You can go to church on Sunday and connect your faith to your life and your families and your children and everything else. This is about how, when things get tough, what do we do? Do we pray? Do we take it to God? Or do we just think we can solve it all ourselves? And certainly it doesn't have to be me. Being my mantra for this year means it also doesn't have to be me or anybody in this realm. It could be up to God, up to Jesus, because I struggle with the concept of God. That's why I prefer the concept of Jesus. If it's up to, if he can help in some way, even if that's just giving me strength, fantastic. That's where I'm going to lean in this year.
I think also, though, with the technology that we now have available, it's very easy, and with the sort of the still hanging over the effects from lockdowns, it's still very easy to become insular from other people as well. And I think it's not just about being connected to God or your faith, or as you sometimes said, your great banana. It's about being connected to other people as well. And it's very easy, especially if you're really busy, it's very easy to forget some of those wider human contacts who can share the joy of success with you, but also be there when things are a bit tough. And one of the things that I'm also going to be doing this year, in fact, starting it as we finish, because I'm having a Zoom chat with Alex Hewlett, who I've not spoken to or not seen for ages. It's that sort of rebuilding or reforming those connections with other people as well, so that you have got someone who on an earthly plane you can also bounce ideas off, because you're sort of with them on a more regular basis, a bit like this group. Sometimes we bounced ideas.
I think it's very true,
and sometimes it's easier to get God's answer through chatting it through with other people as well, because sometimes you chat it through and they will either be used as a mouthpiece, or as you are chatting it, there will be something comes in from over here that as you are explaining what your challenge is, suddenly that shining light of but that's where the problem is comes in as you're explaining it to someone else. Whereas if you're just thinking about it yourself, you don't.
I think particularly, Colin, I think one of the things, and it's about this group, which as we know goes up and down and is a small but well formed group. There is something as well about sitting with Christian friends as well. I think that's I can talk to business colleagues, and my brother is an atheist or a humanist. I can talk to all those people, but there is something I think quite powerful in talking. It's only in business, and there's lots of other groups, not just this one. With Christians, because I think it brings, and the Bible says, where there's one or more gathered in my name, then I'm there also. So, I think there is something about being gathered in His name as well, which is quite. Tim,
absolutely.
Any thoughts?
Oh, plenty. But I was on an international networking group. Not that I was, but there was a chap on there who's a radio DJ, and he was giving his little bit of his talk, but he made two comments. And he said thoughts for this year, and his first comment was practice gratitude, and his second comment was, it's a bit cheeky, but it's a 4-letter acronym, and I'm going to ask you to think about it. RBFU.
RBFU.
Yes.
RBFU.
Yeah.
No idea.
Reach back and follow up.
Reach back.
And what Colin was just saying about reconnecting with people, it just seemed to be so pertinent. Reach back and follow up. And there's so many things on our desk, or so many people, we've just moved on, we've just keep moving on, we keep moving on. And what have we got what have we already got? What
resources? That's really fascinating, because whilst we were talking, I was thinking at the end of this call, I'm going to have a conversation with Colin about trainer talk. Really interesting about possibly reconnecting back in there. And I was sitting thinking about, I could possibly reconnect back in there now. So I think there's something there about, I love that idea of reach back and follow up.
Right. And then this daily devotional, there's the final paragraph, which I think is very pertinent. So I'm going to read it to you. In all that we are and all that we face, God has already provided. The question is whether we have eyes to see. The Apostle Paul learned to be content no matter the circumstances. That means he learned to adopt a perspective that he was being blessed no matter his surroundings. He didn't learn through radical independence, he learned but radical dependence. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me applies to every situation and even the routines of daily life.
I love the idea of radical dependence.
Well, I thought you would. I thought.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool, because Yeah, how radical would it be to really, as you say, put your faith into?
Well, that's what I'm.
Something.
That's what I was. I knew you would like the radical dependence. I could.
Yeah. Well, I like words, so like praise.
Yes. But I just thought that.
Yeah. One of the discussion points we had last night, again around this idea of Joshua and faith, and without faith, or without works, and without faith coming together, then maybe we're divorced from God. And I likened it to a sat nav, because on Friday night, me and Glyn went to pick up my cousin, and we went over to the Batham's Brew Pub in Brierley Hill. And at Glyn's, I set my sat nav to get us to Brierley Hill, but we had to go off route to get to my cousin's first. And it kept on reworking out what I needed to do and whatever. And I said, in some ways, God, Jesus, wants us to get from where we are now. He knows where we need to be. But sometimes he'll put it, either because of our innate stubbornness, or because he will put something in front of us that he knows we can actually make that leap if our faith is really, really strong enough. You walking after 4 days of a knee operation, but maybe we just have that, a bit like the Israelites had back in Joshua's time, didn't have strong enough faith. There was just that little niggle in the back of the head. So we try to find a slightly different route, and God sort of goes, okay, fine. Okay, it's been awkward again, right? I'll reorganize the sat nav link. I'll just, and that's sort of, we still end up where we need to be in the most efficient route, albeit God's had to do a little bit of tweaking, rerouting to the place we need to get.
Again, it's a lovely analogy, Colin, because I think, again, when we're thinking ahead of 2023, and this is why and I use the word, should I use that word? I struggle a little bit with the idea of goal setting, because you can have a goal. Yeah, one, do you know it's the right goal? Is it the right goal? But God is constantly rerouting us. As you say, if he knows where he wants us, we can set a goal which is over here. So if he wants us here and we set a goal that's over, he's just going to keep rerouting it. We'll be thinking, yeah, but this is not working, and I'm not getting towards my goal, and I'm getting frustrated, and
I failed because I've not met the goal.
I've not met my goal. And we can see that, whereas actually it's a bit like the sat nav that's going every time. If you're trying to put it's a very good analogy. If every time you put your destination in, as soon as you go off, it immediately tries rerouting. So you take another turn and you ignore it, and it reroutes again. So God is constantly trying to keep us on track.
Yes.
Recognizes sometimes we'll drift, and he'll just reroute us. But in that rerouting process, we have to accept sometimes we might need to refocus our goals.
Yes. But also, it's not like
times, haven't you?
It's not like one of the early sat navs I downloaded onto my phone, where you could have different voices. And one of the voices you could have was John Cleese as Basil Fawlty. Okay. And I remember, again, using it for one of the early times. I sort of planned where I wanted to be, then went to go and pick my friend up first. And he said, right, now you need to turn right. So I turned left, and then you need to turn left, and I turn right. And after the third time I'd done it, this irritated, infuriated voice came out saying, well, do you want my help or what? and our relationship with God as a sat nav is you never get that. You do not get well, do you want my help or what? He knows that we are awkward, stubborn, bloody-minded, whatever, and he knows that we're going to maybe think we know a better route. And he'll just, as you say, Paul, just gently nudge us back onto the route that he wants us to, which again, in some ways, is why we have to do, I think, some of our own pruning, because we've got something. I really want to be doing this over here. And it's like, yeah, but that's not really, yeah, that's a nice to have. It's not really the plan for where I want you to be. So maybe
a nice analogy. And I think I've just written down lots of things, obviously you've both been saying, but what I liked about what you just said then, Colin, was it doesn't matter how many times we go off track, God doesn't get angry with us. You might get frustrated, but it doesn't get angry with us, you know. And just pushing the metaphor a little bit before, I think I've spoken before about this, how, you know, God will give us a nudge and then a thump and then a kick, and then, you know, if we're not listening. And I think taking your sat nav metaphor into that, what that would look like would be, there'd be, you know, someone doesn't ring you back because it's not right for you. Then so you try ringing them again, and then you get a nasty phone call from them saying, stop calling me, you know, we're not interested or whatever, but you still keep pushing it, and then it becomes, look, I'm going to write you a letter in a minute and, you know, stop you from calling me. Or so although he doesn't get angry, he'll, in the sat nav terms, create an accident or a roadblock or something that literally stops you from going where you want, where you think you need to be going. And I think that's, again, something for us all to bear in mind in 2023, is that God's the best sat nav. What are you going to say, Tim? You just on mute, mate.
Muted, Tim.
I was going to say, with the sat nav analogy or metaphor, let's make certain we don't run out of fuel.
Yeah, another good, sticking with the metaphor. Yeah, I think there's and how do we do that then? How do we not run out of fuel?
Well, I'm coming back to that radical dependence as opposed to being radically independent. You know, just because we think it's the right direction, it doesn't mean to say that it is the right direction. Yeah. So that's them bringing it back in prayer. Yeah.
Back to our Bible study groups or whatever, or our Divine Business Network, and seeking that out. And I think maybe, and I'll put this in the notes for the meeting, really, that I would encourage us, you know, you two, me, and anybody else who decides to listen to this or watch this, that when we are struggling, to occasionally reach out to a Christian friend to say, look, I'm struggling, can you pray for me about this? Or can we just have a 10-minute Zoom call? I've just got something I'm puzzled about. Because I think that's the way of refueling us at times, Tim. And certainly for me, since I returned to church, that's what church does for me. It refuels me on a Sunday.
Yes.
It just takes me back up again. And without that, my dear father, who's, you know, desperately ill now, bless him, disappearing into the black hole of dementia. He used to say, you know, when we was teenagers, he said, "Oh, you need to go to church, Dad. You don't need to go to church. You know, I can be a Christian without going to church." And I get it, but it's the garage that fills us up again, isn't it? Refills the tank, as long as church is doing that for us. And I would struggle now, I think, not to be part of a church community for that reason.
So, and it comes back to refueling, but also, you know, you just mentioned about bouncing ideas off. It's the radical dependence as opposed to radical independence.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
So
which comes back to, it doesn't have to be me, you know,
Yeah.
or you know, it isn't only me that can do this. It only me doesn't only me that has the answer. And certainly Paul's owning 2023, and I'm being very public about this. That's very much, not only is it about leaning on other people, because I think what God would say to me in this moment is, I do lean on him a lot. I do depend on God a lot. But there's also a bunch of other people out there I can depend on as well that I haven't really lent into. You know, it doesn't have to be you, Paul. You know, you can, and in being radically dependent on God and rather than radically independent, when we're dependent on others, it helps them too, raises their self-esteem, helps them develop and grow. Whereas if we are this radical independence, it's just me, I'm only going to do it, then we're not actually helping people, are we, in the way? I mean,
no, and also, to be fair, we're not using all of the skills and intelligence and everything that God gave us.
Yeah, but I think, Tim, you're you know, you are a very good networker. You're a connector. You like to connect people. So, you know, very much the opposite of independence. You're very much encouraging that radical dependence, that idea of linking people together. And maybe that's something, which is why I was saying I might come back to you, Colin, in a second when we finish this, just for 5 minutes, and talk about trainer talk, because I think being part of a community of some sort, whether it's church, whether it's a bunch of trainers, whether it's networking groups, 4N or BNI and things like that. There is something, isn't there, quite powerful in being part of a support group.
Yes.
As long as it's the right sort of support group.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But coming back, there's another analogy, isn't there? And it has a sort of biblical connotations. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but you teach a man to fish, you feed him for life, doesn't it? And currently your business model has been about you, and now you're teaching everybody to fish.
Yeah, and actually in the what's not the moral of the business, in the purpose of my business,
yes.
I actually talk about, when we are talking about people management,
yes.
is that teaching is getting people involved and getting them to think for themselves. Telling someone how to do something that you don't actually teach them at all. The best teachers, and Jesus was really good at this, he would pose a question, he'd get you thinking. So much of what Jesus is teaching is based on parables and metaphors that we've just been using now, because it helps you to contextualize it and think for yourself. And yes, there's the commandments, and yes, there's, he will say certain things, but I think the most powerful teachers are the ones that get other people thinking for themselves, and then indirectly that can come back and help you, which is what I think we're certainly for me.
Those powerful teachers inevitably are leaders, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. So what are your sort of mantras or words or phrases, or have you got any that you're thinking of, or what comes to mind for you as we start to sort of pull this to a close? Colin, have you got a sort of a mantra or a thought or a word that comes to mind for 2023 for you?
I think faith.
Expand?
That sort of that idea of, by having faith and by actually topping that, as Tim said, making sure I don't run out of fuel. So, making sure that I have made time to go to my house group on a Thursday night rather than getting embroiled in late working in American hours, by making sure I'm available for this every first Friday, which reminds me, I didn't get the email, which also I suspect maybe be an issue why there's fewer people here.
It's interesting.
So I saw it in the Facebook group, but I didn't get the email.
Didn't get it either.
But
that's interesting.
Having that and I think this because what we were talking about last night as well, having that faith that I will end up at the end of the year where I need to be, but also doing the works as well as evidence of that faith, and pulling those two together. For me, I think is this year's and linked to both of that, making sure I say thank you on a regular basis.
So it didn't bounce. It must be in your junk.
Okay. Oh, well, we'll look. Yeah.
Have a look. Yeah, no, because it's open rate's 24%, only sent to 21 people. That's interesting. Only 5 people opened it. 1 person clicked. Not sent. 5. No, none of your emails. So not sure what happened there, but it'll be somewhere in the gummings of your emails, perhaps. But certainly, I'll double check that you're definitely on the list. Delivered. Some weird things happen with this list sometimes. People think you're not on the list.
Who, Colin or Tim?
Both of you.
Well, there we are. That's why we didn't receive it.
I mean, you should be in the list of people who are
right. Hang on. I wasn't on the list a while back, and you added me. I wonder, have you got 2 lists going, and you've sent it to a different list?
I'll have a look. I don't think so. I've only got one. It's only been delivered to 21 people. Alan's not had it. It's all the people that don't come.
You've sent it to the list of to people who don't turn up.
Maybe
people that do turn up.
I'll have a look. Yeah, it's all the people that don't. Oh, David Benton's on it, and he opened it. Steve Wright, Dave Craythorne. Strange, but your names, you're quite right. You didn't get it. It's not been sent to you. I'll have to have a look.
Okay, well, we'll let
Technology,
you off.
eh?
We'll let you off.
It's probably wise, and forgive those who are listening if they are listening to this.
We can't send you to the headmaster's study because you are the headmaster.
That's a bit of an interesting one. So Tim, Colin's word is faith. Tim, have you got a word or a phrase for 2023?
Well, I'm going to go with consolidate and also that I quite like that acronym that reach back and follow up.
Yeah, because you took before, haven't you, Tim, as your personality style is very much, the magpie, the next exciting thing and moving on to the next thing all the time. And you've done a lot of work in the past. And is it worth dipping back into some of those contacts and people that you've had?
And then that's really what pruning is about. Stop letting that branch grow off that way. Let that branch grow off there. Cut all that back, and actually, what's the root stock? If we're talking about horticultural terms, whether if you had an orchard, you wouldn't let it keep growing and growing and growing, would you?
No, you'd trim it, exactly, and you'd focus on the areas that need to grow, and if things are out of hand, you'd trim them back. So brilliant. Okay, so any final thoughts, and then I'll just close in a brief prayer, then I'll stop recording.
No final thoughts, and I'm glad you're closing slightly early because I've got a 10 o'clock.
Yes, exactly. No problem. No problem. I'm going to have a quick chat with Colin about trainer talk as well. So any final thoughts, Colin, on the year ahead? Right. Okay. Well, thank you both. You were obviously both meant to find your way here, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, despite the fact that most people didn't get the email by the looks of things. Next month is the beginning of, be the beginning of February again. But let me just close briefly in prayer for both of you, and then I'll stop recording. So Father God, thank you for the richness of this discussion this morning with Colin and Tim, and thank you for their wisdom, their thoughts. I ask you to bless their businesses, their working lives, and all of those that are part of this group and beyond, that you are an ever-present support, direction, and sat-nav for each of our businesses and our business lives this year, hoping that at all times we stay connected in that radical dependence that Tim has talked about this morning. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Let me just stop the recording.